would also like to acknowledge the following who are here with us as resource persons for the record. We have the Honorable Chief Justice Hilario Davide Jr., the Honorable Chief Justice Renato Puno, the Honorable Justice Adolfo Azcuna, the Honorable Senate President Nene Pimentel. We have with us a member of the Constitutional Commission of 1986 and a framer of the 1987 Constitution, Professor Garcia. For the record, and for the information of our colleagues, Professor Garcia here has lent me the original first publication of the 1986-1987 Constitution, published by the chairperson of the Constitutional Commission, Cecilia Munoz Palma. So this is the original draft. Only 100 copies have been produced. So he's lending this today to remind us of the Constitution that was drafted and enacted in 1987. We also have with us Chief Presidential Legal Counsel, Secretary Sal Panelo, Secretary Adelino Sitoy of the Presidential Legislative Liaison Office. From the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, we have Attorney Amador Tolentino, my schoolmate and my classmate in the UP College of Law. Dr. Maria Ella Atienza, Chair, Department of Political Science of the University of the Philippines. Attorney Michael Yusinco, non-resident research fellow of the Ateneo de Manila University. Dean Ronald Mendoza, School of Government, Ateneo de Manila University. Mr. Mon Casiple, Executive Director, Institute for Political and Electoral Reforms. We also have with us former Senate President and former Chairman of this committee, Constitutional Amendments Committee, Senator Drilon. And we will acknowledge the other resource persons as they arrive, as well as other senators who will be arriving. My opening statement for the record, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Today we will talk about the proposals to amend or revise the 1987 Constitution. The committee currently has 3 pending resolutions, namely resolution of both houses number 1 by Minority Leader Senator Drilon, Joint Resolution number 1 by Senator Dick Gordon, and Senate Resolution 580, authored by Senators Lacson, Honasan, Zubiri, Poe, and the Minority Leader, Senator Soto, the third. This is the third meeting and hearing of this Committee on Constitutional Amendments on the matter. Minority Leader Senator Franklin Drilon, who used to head this committee, conducted the first public hearing on these proposals, except for the last one, to amend or revise the Constitution last December 8, 2016. We know 2 things from that hearing. Number 1, among the invited resource persons then, majority believe that changing the Constitution is timely, mainly either in the form of government or in restrictive economic provisions. There were those who said, on the other hand, that amending the Constitution is not necessary at this time. Number 2, everyone agreed that if ever, Congress must vote separately should they meet as a constituent assembly. A subsequent hearing was held last February 22, 2017, where participants continued to discuss the points raised above. In today's hearing, we wish to continue to shed light on the following main questions. That hearing was undertaken over a year ago. Many developments have taken place since then, and perhaps some positions may have been may have changed or adjusted and the like. But we would like to go back to the issues and the questions on the matter of changing or amending the Constitution. Number 1, kailangan ba? Is there a need to amend or revise the Constitution? Why or why not? Number 2, ang pagbabago ba ng Konstitusyon ay gagawin ng isang konkon o ng Constituent Assembly? Should the amendments or revisions be proposed by a constitutional convention or by Congress itself as a Constituent Assembly? Number 3, if we need to change the Constitution, what parts or what provisions of the Constitution should be amended or revised and why? Number 4, on this matter, if Congress convenes as a Constituent Assembly to amend or revise the Constitution, should the Senate and House of Representatives vote jointly or separately? It should be noted that in the last 2 hearings, all resource persons on the matter said that the Congress must vote separately. And number 5, can Congress limit the power of the Constituent Assembly or the Constitutional Convention? Can Congress pass a resolution limiting the power of the Constituent Assembly or Constitutional Convention, or are these, or do they have plenary powers? Altogether, the answer to these questions should, in the end, answer the following. Sino ang makikinabang sa mga minumungkahing babaguhin sa saligang batas? Ang taong bayan ba? Paano mapapaunlad ang buhay ng mga Pilipino sa pag-amyenda ng saligang batas? Ano ang kailangan gawin ni Juana de la Cruz para siguraduhin o tiyakin na sila ang makikinabang sa anumang planong pag-amenda ng saligang batas? To help us and the public further understand these questions, we invited former Justices of the Supreme Court, as well as members of the 1986 Constitutional Commission, former legislators, executive officials, and members of the academe and civil society. As this involves no less than our nation's fundamental law, where our rights are enshrined as citizens and as a people, we hope to listen to all sides on the matter of charter change. Maraming salamat po. May we now know if Senator Lacson, who is the author of one of the resolutions, has an opening statement? Senator Drilon? Senator Hontiveros, opening statement. Yes, please. You have the floor, ma'am.
Salamat, Mr. Chairman, at magandang umaga po sa lahat ng mga resource persons at mga kasama dito sa komite at nasa bulwagan. Mr. Chair, we should never be afraid of change. I've always believed that the Constitution is a living and evolving document, and while it should serve as the bedrock of our most cherished values like human rights and democracy, it should also reflect the aspirations and needs of our people, which are ever-changing. The Filipino people should be the architects of our destiny, and for this reason, the highest law of the land should not be in a state of antiquated stasis. Ngunit, Mr. Chairman, ang paraan ng pag-aamyenda ng saligang batas ay hindi pwedeng gawing basta-basta. While the Constitution cannot be static, neither can it be used as a tool to serve the interests of political elites or as a means to the narrow ends of those who want to perpetuate themselves in power. Kaya po ay mariin ang aking pagtutol sa paraan ng pag-amyenda ng saligang batas na CONAS o Constituent Assembly. This is a position that Akbayan, my party, has taken even before when previous presidents have attempted to change the Constitution via this route. Hindi po maaring mga politiko na makikinabang sa charter change ang uupo bilang delegado. Right now, the promise of term extension is being dangled as a carrot to legislators. Mahirap nga namang tanggihan. How can we trust we legislators to be objective, fully objective in this light? How can we be sure that a sober perusal and assessment of the provisions of the Constitution will be undertaken with the Noel elephant in the room? Second, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I have my doubts as to the capacity of the administration to carry out an inclusive, democratic process for charter change. Ngayon pa lang we are force-fed their brand of federalism that raises a lot of problematic issues and do not seem to value people-led and participatory fiscal processes. Akbayan supports federalism, but with specific features that ensure the creation of wide democratic spaces and promote human development. Hindi ako tiyak na ang inihahain na panukala para sa federalismo ng administrasyon ay magdadala nito. And in sum, Mr. Chair, I assert that the question, the prejudicial question of why amend, must always attend the question of how to amend. In this case, it seems very clear to me that the agenda of amendment is to facilitate the transition to PDP Laban's brand of federalism circa 2018, which will greatly impact on term limits and the composition of the legislature, including the present legislature. For these reasons, Mr. President, a con-con would be our best step forward. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Senator Hontiveros. We can now proceed. We will allow our resource persons 5 to 7 minutes if they have opening statements. Otherwise, we can, after the opening statements of our resource persons, those who have opening statements, we will proceed with the question and answer. And we will have the senators raise their questions by virtue of their appearance, order of appearance. So first will be Senator Lacson, and then Senator Hontiveros, and then Senator Drilon. We will be giving the senators 7 minutes each to raise their questions, and the 7 minutes will not include the time allotted for the answers. I mean the answers of our resource persons. With this, I believe Senator Chief Justice Davide has requested that he be given a few minutes to make his opening statement. You have the floor, Chief Justice Davide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Honorable Senators Drilon, Lacson, and Hontiveros, and my fellow resource speakers. I have to go directly to the issues raised, but I should like to make it a record that I submitted a 25-page position paper, to which is attached a 32-page speech I delivered before the NBC and other business entities. As to the first key issue, my answer is there is absolutely no need to amend or revise our Constitution. Of the 5 constitutions of the Philippines, which the Philippines ever had, the Malolos Constitution, the 1935 Constitution, the 1973 Constitution, the Freedom Constitution of 1986, and the 1987 Constitution, only the 1987 Constitution has remained unamended for nearly 31 years. On 2 February 2018, it will be exactly 31 years. Serious previous efforts to amend it all failed. In 1997, during the term of President Fidel Ramos, there was a proposal by way of a people's initiative, the third mode of proposing amendments, to lift the term limitations of elected officials. The principal objective was to allow then President Ramos to run for re-election in the elections of May 1998. Under Section 4 of Article 7 of the Constitution, the President shall not be eligible for any re-election. The People's Initiative proposal was filed pursuant to RA number 6735, or the Initiative and Referendum Law. But the Supreme Court, in its decision of 19 March 1997, in Santiago versus Commission on Elections, declared that the law was incomplete as worded and insufficient for purposes of the People's Initiative to propose amendments to the Constitution. Hence, the proposal was struck down. Then, during the term of President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, there was a second attempt, again by means of a People's Initiative, to amend the Constitution by changing the form of government from presidential to parliamentary. As was generally perceived, the purpose was to allow the then President, who was not eligible for election, to continue to hold on to power by being elected as Prime Minister. In its decision of 25 October 2006, in the case of Lambido versus Commission on Elections, the Supreme Court frustrated the move in light of the decision in Santiago case, and it was also not in accordance with Section 2 of Article 17 of the Constitution. Until now, Congress has not amended that initiative law to cure its defects pointed out by the Supreme Court. in the Secretary in Santiago case. In short, Your Honors, this 1987 Constitution has achieved an unsurpassed record of permanence, capitalized permanence. As explained by Justice Isagani Cruz in his book Constitutional Law, 2000 edition, page 7, permanence means the capacity of a constitution to, open quote, resist capricious and whimsical change dictated not by legitimate needs, but only by passing fancies, temporary passions, or occasional infatuations of the people with ideas or personalities, close quote. I would not hesitate to assert that our 1987 Constitution, even if imperfect, as none is perfect except God, is the best in the world, the best for our country and our people, not just of this generation, but even for generations yet unborn. It is the only Constitution I know of which is pro-God, pro-Filipino, pro-people, pro-life, pro-family, pro-marriage, pro-poor, pro-human rights, pro-women, pro-environment, among others. It contains sufficient provisions against abuse of power and guarantees people's active participation in governance, including the use of people power. It is the only Constitution in the world which institutionalizes the doctrine that a public office is a public trust, meaning that all government officials and employees are servants of the people, thereby enshrining the servant leadership principle which Jesus Christ himself proclaimed. I have yet to see another constitution which could surpass our present constitution. I know this constitution very well. I was among the commissioners of the 1986 Constitutional Commission who drafted it. With us now this morning are two other commissioners of the commission, Commissioners Azcuna and Garcia. I submitted several constitutional reform proposals and introduced innumerable amendments to the proposed provisions which found their way into the various articles of the final draft of the Constitution. I actively participated in all the deliberations, both at the committee levels and at the plenary sessions of the Commission. When we voted on the final draft of the Constitution at the plenary session on 12 October 1986, I ended my affirmative vote with these words: modesty aside, into this Constitution I have given my blood, toils, tears, and sweat. This is the Constitution I'm willing to die for. On several occasions in the recent past, I reiterated this solemn pledge. Now I do so once more in this public hearing. I will until I breathe my last. I am now 82 years old. Unfortunately, a massive majority of its provisions have not been implemented. There are myriads of provisions which require appropriate legislations to give life to them. The government and Congress are explicitly mandated to do so, and these mandates appear about 150 times in the Constitution. We have also been informed of a recent survey result that only about 27% of the people know about the Constitution, and likewise observe with results that the vast majority of our people are not in favor of amending or revising the Constitution. I must underscore this basic principle. Anyone proposing to amend or revise the Constitution must first be an assiduous student of the Constitution, who has a full grasp of its contents and of the spirit and principles which are its cornerstones, and has found them, or some of them, to be stumbling blocks to the achievement of our people's dreams, hopes, aspirations, and longings. Who has found that the Constitution cannot fully pursue or implement those for which the sovereign Filipino people have implored God's help in the preamble of our Constitution. Before entertaining any thought to amend the Constitution, our lawmakers and leaders should first meticulously examine its provisions, reflect on them, and ask themselves, have I taken enough steps to give life to or implement the provisions and the mandates of the Constitution? If they have not, or if they have done only a little, they should not be a party to the mangling or tinkering of the Constitution. Now, on the second issue, It is very clear from what I said that there is no need to amend the Constitution. My answer, therefore, would be, as to the second issue, it would logically follow that the answer to the second issue would be, there is nothing in the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines which can stand amendment or revision. However, there are proposals to amend the same, and we have to consider these proposals. And among these proposals would be about the federal system. The chairman, however, had requested me not to discuss this anymore because there will be another setting for this, another time to discuss federalism. I have prepared a very extensive discussion on federalism. Probably another setting will be considered because that is related to the second issue. So another time may be taken for that. But it is in my position paper. There is a proposal that would have to be considered in relation to the third. This is the proposal on federalism. And I would like to say right now that a shift to federalism is a lethal experiment, a fatal leap, a plunge to death, and a leap to hell. I will take that up in another setting. Therefore, it is obvious that on the third issue, should the amendment or revision be re-federalism and other proposed constitution be by Congress itself as a constituent assembly or by a constitutional commission? My answer is it should be by a constitutional convention, by a constitutional convention. The adoption of federalism with the current proposals in the lower house to adopt a new constitution for the Federal Republic of the Philippines with massive substantive changes of provisions of the 1987 Constitution would involve the massive overhaul of the 1987 Constitution. To ensure a truly impartial, comprehensive discussion on this crucial issue of federalism or the entry into our midst of a foreign invader, I especially submit that the matter be left to a constitutional convention with delegates duly elected by the people exclusively for that purpose, not as politicians. I propose that the election for the members of the convention be non-partisan. There should be no rush, no hurry in the journey to adopt a foreign invader, a total stranger denied entry for about 120 years already. A very unusual rush and precipitate action to fulfill a current obsession or infatuation of our leaders, the federal system, would validate what I earlier described as a lethal experiment, a fatal leap, a plunge to death, a leap to hell. Now on the fourth issue. If the Congress convenes as a constituent assembly for the purpose of amending the Constitution, should the Senate and the House of Representatives vote jointly or separately? Section 1 of Article 17 of the Constitution provides, any amendment to or revision of the Constitution may be proposed by 1. The Congress upon a vote of 3/4 of all its members, or 2. A constitutional convention. Note should immediately be taken of the fact that the section does not state whether, when acting as a constituent assembly, the Congress should be in a joint or in separate session. The following pronouncements of Father Joaquin Bernas on one of the commissioners of the 1986 Constitutional Commission and a highly respected constitutionalist in his book, The 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, a commentary, 2003 edition, pages 1298 to 1299, is very instructive. The provision says nothing about a joint session. The provision raises two questions. First, must Congress assemble in joint session before it can propose amendments or call a constitutional convention? Or alternatively, may the two houses, as they are, and who are they are proposed amendments or call a constitutional convention by a vote of 3/4 of the respective membership. Since nothing is said about a joint session, it is submitted that each House may separately formulate amendments by vote of 3/4 of all its members and then pass it on to the other House for a similar process. Disagreements can be settled through a conference committee. Alternatively, however, it is also submitted that Congress may decide to come together in joint session and vote separately or proposed amendments and revisions. Since the Constitution is silent about the method, and since the mandatory process has been committed to Congress under the political questions doctrine, Congress should be free to choose whichever method it prefers. It is also submitted, however, that what is essential is that both houses vote separately. This is because the power to propose amendments is given not to a unicameral body, but to a bicameral body. The meaning of a constitutional command can also be drawn from the non-governmental structure set out by the Constitution. I fully agree with Father Bernas. On the final key issue, Mr. Chairman, can Congress pass a resolution limiting the powers of the Constitutional Assembly or Constitutional Convention, or are their powers plenary? As to the Constituent Assembly, what Father Bernas had pronounced, and which I have just read, provides us the answer. If the Senate and the House act separately, as in the passage of an ordinary legislation, each House controls itself. If Congress should choose to sit in joint session, the first step would be for both houses to approve a joint resolution calling for Congress to convene in joint session for the purpose of proposing amendments or revisions to the Constitution. The resolution for the convening may determine what should be taken up as proposed amendments or revisions, which would require the affirmative votes of the members of each House voting separately. If the resolution for a joint session to propose amendments or revisions does not specify what should be taken up, anything can be taken up. As to the Constitutional Convention, Section 3 of Article 17 of the Constitution provides, the Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of all its members, call a Constitutional Convention. Can that call restrict the powers of the Constitutional Convention? The noted constitutional law authority, Enrique Fernando, in his book, The Constitution of the Philippines, 2nd ed., page 17, said, a constitutional convention is a coordinate body with the main departments of the government entrusted with the duty of drafting a constitution for approval by the electorate. In performing such a function, it has full powers. It is not subject to the restraint by legislature or the courts, either as to what subject or subjects will be taken up or may be proposed. Only the people, more specifically those enjoying the right to vote, can set aside the action taken. That will be the end of my opening statement. I'm open for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Justice Davide. The Chair acknowledges the presence of Senator Gatchalian, who is with us this morning. Earlier, Justice Davide mentioned that this representation, the Chair requested that our opening statements focus primarily on whether we need to amend the Constitution and what mode. Because the proposals in terms of what we will be amending, assuming that precisely we proceed there, will be tackled in a separate hearing. This is just so that we can thresh out the issue as best we can. I understand the former Senate President also has an opening statement. Senate President Pimentel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished colleagues in the Senate. I'd like to go directly to the issues that have been proposed to us to respond to. And let me just state that, contrary to the statement of my dear friend, Chief Justice Davide, the proposal to revise the Constitution by adopting the federal system is not a lethal proposal. It is a vital proposal to give life and meaning to the intent of good governance and good life, provide good life to our people. So let me go directly, Mr. Chairman, to the issues that you have asked us to respond to. I, of course, would like to reserve the right to speak on federalism at the right time, but for our purposes of our discussion today, let me just focus on the questions that have been raised to us. Is there a need to revise the Constitution? My answer is yes, if, as we propose, we intend to adopt the federal system into our governmental setup. For the reason that you cannot adopt the federal system by just passing a law. You have to revise the Constitution, and therefore we should do so. Now, but why should the Constitution be revised? My dear friends, I'd like to advert to the fact that in 1991, I think we approved the local government code and started to implement it. But you will notice, Mr. Chairman, that in spite of the passage of the local government code, which was primarily intended to diffuse the concentration of powers in the hands of the Metro Manila government and give substantial powers and authority to define the lives and the welfare of the people in their own communities, to the local government units, you will find out, Mr. Chairman, that in spite of the passage of the local government code, when what was it? I think it was Typhoon Yolanda. When Typhoon Yolanda hit Samar and Leyte, my dear friends, who was it who went around distributing the funds to give relief to those who were stricken by Typhoon Yolanda? It was Dinky Suleiman, who was the chair of the DSWD, secretary of the DSWD, one of the departments that had already been devolved to local governments. And yet, I think this is a very significant, proof that in spite of the intended devolution of the powers of local government units in three departments, agriculture, health, and social welfare, the Metro Manila government still refuses to let go of the levers of power that they have over these three major departments. And therefore, I was thinking that if we have to revise the Constitution to give meaning to the devolution that was intended by the local government code, we might as well move forward the scope and the powers that are going to be devolved to the local government units by adopting the federal system. But as I said, I will restrain myself. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, but when I start speaking, I can no longer stop. But I will try to do so and to be a little more precise. So, what parts of the Constitution should be revised? Basically, those parts of the Constitution that deal with the structure of our governmental setup and the powers that our government departments would exercise under the revised Constitution. To be a little more precise, since our proposal to revise the Constitution has to do with the adoption of the federal system into our presidential form of government, the revision would essentially alter the provisions dealing with the elections of our senators, basically, and which we propose we should do by federal states. I limit myself to that point here, but we have a more extensive explanation of what our federal state proposal entails, a copy of which we are willing to furnish this chamber should it desire to do so. But let me emphasize that the good provisions of the Constitution should not be revised. There is no need to revise the good provisions of the Constitution. And therefore, for example, existing system of the ombudsman, why should you revise that? Many other parts. But in any event, I go to number 3, the questions raised to us: should amendments or revisions be done by a constitutional convention or by Congress acting as a constituent assembly? The better, if not the best way to revise the Constitution is through a constitutional convention. There's no question in my mind about that, where delegates representing the provinces and highly urbanized cities are given the right to elect the delegates who would espouse their views on what changes should be done to the existing basic law so that people are more empowered to address their desired goals to develop themselves and modernize their own communities. But realistically speaking, it is really quite expensive to do that. We know that. Elect the delegates throughout the nation. You have to pay for their salaries and their per diems and their staff and all that. Provide a place where they are going to meet. So, in other words, the expenses would be a little bit more expensive compared to revising the Constitution through a constituent assembly. In this connection, allow me to suggest that we should refrain from using the now popular acronym CONAS, because mischievous-minded people might be tempted to deride the effort as run by asses or mules rather than by our respective representatives of both Congress. Now, kidding aside, the more important thing that we as a people should consider doing if the Constitution is being revised via a constituent assembly is for us to participate, for the people to participate in the process proactively, actively, and decisively. Proactively, by organizing forums to discuss our priority concerns regarding what articles of the Constitution need to be revised to attain a fuller observance of the people's basic rights and liberties, and the curtailment of autocratic tendencies of people in power. To say that to speed up the adoption of the federal system, there should be no election. There should be a 10-year transition. Excuse me, but I think there's a lot of kalokohan, Mr. President. I mean, as the saying goes, the end never justifies the means. And so, what I'm saying is that the people must not only be proactive, by organizing the forums or others can participate, they should actively also do so by attending and inputting their views into the public hearings that the committees of both houses of Congress are expected to, create. And the people should be decisive by voting for or against the proposed revisions of the Constitution at the plebiscite that is mandated by the fundamental law to be called for the ratification or rejection of the proposed changes in the Constitution. What I'm saying, Mr. President, that even as I am, an active exponent of the adoption of the federal system, I'm not saying that that is the only way. I mean, we should hear the other side, the people's views, so that the discussion will be more fully understandable to the people. On question number 4, if the revision of the Constitution is done by Constituent Assembly, should the two houses of Congress vote jointly or separately? I submit I submit that it would be best if the two houses of Congress should hold their sessions to revise the Constitution jointly, but they should vote separately. Now, of course, in the process of holding discussions jointly, the proposal the procedure should already be clearly defined. How do you, receive the views of 24 senators without being overwhelmed by the tsunami of 250 plus members of Congress, etc. So, in other words, jointly holding hearings, but voting separately, I think should be the proper thing to do. Of course, the fact that there are more than 250 members of the House and only 24 senators, as I said earlier, would need a clearly refined manner of allocating the time for discussion, for example, in the joint session. But as I said, the voting of the two houses should be done separately. Otherwise, the 24 senators, even if they were to act as one, would suffer fates worse than those who were shown by the Fukushima tsunami in Japan some time ago. Last question, can Congress pass a resolution limiting the powers of the Constituent Assembly or the Constitutional Convention? My take is Congress may indeed include in the law calling for a Constituent Assembly or a Constitutional Convention the methods of revising the Constitution in effect that would somehow limit the powers of the Assembly. Although it is also a fact that once convened, the Constitutional Convention would become a sort of a sovereign body that nobody can dictate to. So these are the things that we have to be alerted to, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for the kindness that you have accorded me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senate President Nene Pimentel. The good senator mentioned public hearings. We would like to place on record and for the information of the members of our committee, and of course the public, the committee intends to hold public hearings tentatively scheduled or set for Baguio, Cebu City, Cebu, and Cagayan de Oro.
And in the Muslim areas, Mr. President, if that should be possible.
And the arm. So this is for the information of our colleagues. The details of the schedules will be announced by this committee later on. Before we proceed, just to place on record, the following have joined us. We have Ms. Sandra Paredes, Executive Director, League of Provinces of the Philippines. We have Commissioner Robert Cadiz of the Commission on Human Rights. We have ASEC Jonathan Malaya of the DILG. And we have former Dean Antonio Lavinia, the School of Government, Ateneo de Manila. He was here earlier. Perhaps he stepped out. We also have Attorney Al Oxales, a consultant for PDP Laban Federalism Institute Study Group. We can now proceed. I understand the good Secretary Sal Panelo also has an opening. No? Chief Justice Puno said that he will answer directly later on when questions are posited. Professor Edmund Garcia and I believe Justice Azcuna also has an opening statement. Professor Ed Garcia, the former Constitutional Commissioner.
Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, perhaps I was misunderstood. I would also like to address the different questions.
So we will have Chief Justice Puno, and then Professor Garcia, and then Justice Azcuna. And then we will proceed to this side of the panel. You have the floor, Chief Justice Puno.
Good morning, Your Honors. I will not be unduly prolix in my discussion. So I will omit any opening statement. And let me go directly to the different questions posed by the committee. The first question is there a need to amend or revise the Constitution? Why or why not? Let me start by saying that the 1987 Constitution improved our two previous constitutions. The 1935 Constitution and the 1973 Constitution. The unanimous view is that the 87 Constitution restored our democracy. And more than restoring our democracy, the 87 Constitution expanded the democratic space where our people can exercise their power of direct democracy. But having said that, the 87 Constitution is now 31 years old. Conditions have changed. The political, the social, and the economic configuration, not only of the Philippines, but the whole world have changed. And so we now have globalization. We now see the effects of the revolution caused by technology. And I like to think that it is time to give the 87 Constitution a look over, a no-nonsense review. And that is why we hear a lot of calls for re-examination of the 87 Constitution. For instance, there is that persistent call to review the alleged restrictive economic policies embedded in our 87 Constitution. And more significantly, there is now this movement to shift to a federal form of government from a unitary form of government. If we are shifting from a unitary to a federal form of government, then necessarily we need to revise the Constitution. There can be no surgical amendment of the Constitution. This shifting will require overhauling the Constitution. Among others, we have to redefine the philosophy of the federal government that we will adopt. We will have to restructure the political and judicial machinery that will be established in the federal government and in the states. And we have to consider the division of powers within the federal government itself, as well as the allocation of powers between the federal government and the states. And of course, we have to define, we have to lay down the roadmap towards the transition to federalism. Well, of course, this shift to federalism has spawned some opposition. Justice David, for instance, calls this as a leap to hell. I do not know how to intelligently answer that fear because I have not been to hell, Your Honors. But in the proper time, and I think some sessions will be devoted to this, we should be able to lock horns with those who are opposed to this shifting to federalism. The second question is, if so, what parts of the Constitution should be amended or revised, and why? Well, if we are shifting to federalism, the greater part of the Constitution will have to be revised, excepting perhaps the Bill of Rights. Even the manner of amending or revising the Constitution should be changed to fit a federal form of government. If you look at the various federal constitutions, Your Honor, there are various ways of amending or revising the federal constitution. In fact, you read these different constitutions, there are provisions that are beyond amendment. For instance, provisions regarding the nature of the government, provisions establishing a democratic republican form of government. In other constitutions, these provisions cannot be revised. They are deemed to be permanent. On the other hand, there are provisions in the federal constitutions where the manner of amendment is extra difficult. And that is, the purpose of that is to preserve the Union. And then you go further, you will find that there are provisions in the federal constitution that are easier to amend. And so you have various systems of amendment in a federal constitution, unlike in a unitary constitution where you have only this kind of simple ways of amendment. So let me go to the third question. Should the amendment or revision be proposed by a CONCON or a CONAS? Why? I am on record, Your Honors, as having misgivings used the Constituent Assembly to revise our Constitution. Firstly, throughout our constitutional history, we have never used the Constituent Assembly to revise our Constitution. We have no experience with that. Secondly, Your Honors, the primary business of Congress is to make laws. Given the need for Congress to act on so many important bills pending consideration, I believe it should not be saddled with the more difficult job of rewriting the Constitution. Also, it seems that the time of Congress will be further consumed by the ongoing impeachment proceedings against the sitting Chief Justice. Third, and perhaps more importantly, some members of Congress may find themselves in a conflict situation in the course of writing or rewriting the Constitution. Issues like establishing a one-house parliament, abolishing the party list system, regulating political dynasties, extending the term of sitting legislators, may render the action of those affected suspect to the public. And so as early as now, we see the gathering cloud of suspicion on these issues. Fourth, Your Honors, the constitutional provision on how the Constituent Assembly should meet and vote is the subject of a lot of uncertainty. It has the real potential of delaying the work of revising the Constitution on the part of the CONAS. Incidentally, this is one reason why we have to re-examine the 87 Constitution. That 87 Constitution, Your Honors, was done in haste because then President Cory Aquino did not want to rule under the Freedom Constitution, where she enjoyed authoritarian powers. And that is why the 87 Constitution is the only Constitution where you find the phrase, as may be provided by law. And that is why also you have this problem now, where this manner of amending the Constitution is wrapped in a riddle, wrapped in mystery. The oft-quoted justification for a CONAS is that it is cheaper than a CONCON. To me, that is a cheap argument. We should not count the cost when writing a constitution. A good constitution is the best investment a people can make. My preferred mode, Your Honors, is a constitutional convention, but a hybrid constitutional convention. Hybrid because its composition will be a mixture of elected and appointed delegates. This Constitutional Convention, of course, will be non-partisan in character. Political parties will be banned from putting up candidates. And so the delegates will be elected on the basis of their platform. And to help the delegates in their task, experts in constitutional making coming from different disciplines, law, public administration, political science, economics, the religious, the sciences, vetted by a competent body, not just the president, can be convened, and this competent body will be the ones to make the appointment. These experts have to be impressed to this service, or more probably than not, they will not run for any public office for various justifiable reasons. And I submit that it is within the power of Congress to determine the composition of the Constitutional Convention. The fourth question is, if Congress convenes as a constituent assembly for the purpose of amending or revising the Constitution, should the Senate and the House of Representatives vote jointly or separately? We need to interpret correctly Article 17, Section 1 of the 87 Constitution, which states, and I quote, "Any amendment to or revision of this Constitution may be proposed by the Congress upon the vote of 3/4 of all its members." How do you make the proper interpretation of these provisions? We have to make use of the best available tools on constitutional interpretation. This means, among others, that we have to go to the origin of this provision. We have to examine its metamorphosis until its final wording. We have to interpret this provision not in isolation, but in conjunction with the other provisions of the Constitution. In other words, an interpretation that is holistic in character. And then the interpretation that we should make should be one that will not result in an anomalous situation. One of those anomalous situations would be the cancellation of the institutional participation of the Senate when the CONAS meets as a constituent assembly. A study of the proceedings of the Constitutional Commission will reveal that initially the intent of the Constitutional Commission was to establish a unicameral National Assembly. In the last days of the CONCOM, however, it decided to have a bicameral Congress. In its haste, the CONCOM failed to reward Article 17, Section 1, which is proper for a unicameral assembly, but improper for a bicameral Congress. So look at our 1935 Constitution, where our Congress was bicameral. The meeting of both houses there was joint, in joint session assembled, but voting was separate. Compare that with our 1973 Constitution, where we had a unicameral assembly. There is no provision there for a joint assembly meeting. No provision for voting separately. Because you do not have two houses. What is only provided for is the number of the required votes. In other words, when a bicameral Congress convenes as a CONAS, the intent, the tradition, and the practice is to make the two houses vote as separate and independent institutions. The members of the House and the Senate have different constituencies. The members of the House represent districts, while the senators represent the nation. They have different perspectives, and these perspectives are to be reflected institutionally. The House as one institution and the Senate as another institution. And as institutions, they are equal. We will destroy this institutional equality if we interpret Article 17, Section 1 to mean that the House and the Senate shall vote together and not separately. The numerical superiority of the House will simply overwhelm the Senate. You look at the other provisions of the Constitution, where the Senate is required to vote separately as an institution. You can find this in Article 6, Section 23, to declare the existence of a state of war. You can find this also in Article 7, Section 9, to confirm the President's nomination of a Vice President whenever there is a vacancy in the office. You can find this also in Article 7, Section 4, where there is canvassing of the votes for President and Vice President. You can find this also in Article 7, Section 11, where they have to decide conflicting claims of the President and his cabinet as to the fitness of the President to discharge the powers of the presidency. In all these instances, voting on the part of the Senate separately as an institution is provided. And yet, it is clear that in this situation, the task that is being done by the Senate is arguably less important, less in significance, less in magnitude than when it is taking the job of amending or revising the Constitution. In other words, the desideratum of preserving the institutional independence of the Senate is much more when the Senate is engaged in the task of revising or amending the Constitution. The next question is, can Congress pass a resolution limiting the power of the Constituent Assembly or the CONCON, or are their powers plenary? My submission, Your Honors, is that Congress cannot pass a resolution limiting the constituent power of the CONAS or the CONCON to amend or revise the Constitution. The CONAS or the CONCON owe their creation and their powers from the Constitution. And hence, the exercise of their constituent powers can only be limited by the Constitution. It cannot be limited by Congress in the exercise of its law-making powers. There are three theories on the status of a CONCON. The first is the theory of conventional sovereignty. According to this theory, the CONCON is supreme over the other departments of government because the powers it exercises are in the nature of sovereign powers. That is one theory. The second theory considers the CONCON, on the other hand, as inferior to the other departments of government because it is merely a creation of the legislature. There is the third school of thought. And this theory holds that as long as the CONCON exists and confines itself within the sphere of its jurisdiction, the CONCON is independent of and co-equal with the other departments of government. We follow this third school of thought as held in Mabanag versus Lopez Vito, 73 Philippines 1. Like the other departments of government, therefore the CONCON is limited only by the Constitution. For instance, its work must be submitted to the people for ratification. The vote is majority, and the votes must be cast in a plebiscite called for that purpose. The time frame for the plebiscite must be followed, not earlier than 60 days nor later than 90 days. But there are also views, and this includes Chief Justice Roberto Concepcion, that a CONCON cannot violate generally accepted principles of international law, or what is known as jus cogens. So, on that question, Your Honors, we follow the third school of thought. The other so that answers the last question, Your Honor, whether the powers of the Constituent Assembly are plenary powers. That ends my short presentation. I'll be happy to oblige if there are interpellations from the members of the committee.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice Puno. That was very enlightening, as well as, of course, the inputs of the other resource persons thus far. We have Professor Ed Garcia for his opening statement. And then Associate Justice Azcuna.
Thank you very much, Chair Senator Kiko Pangilinan. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you and all the other senators, especially in this committee, for bringing us together. This is a gathering of friends, a gathering of present and past colleagues whom I have not seen for a long time. I am very grateful. Thank you. As a framer of the 1987 Constitution, I would be among the first ones to acknowledge that the basic charter drafted more than 3 decades ago is an imperfect document and can be improved. But before we do so, allow me to give a brief context, for as a preacher once said, text without context is pretext. I think that's a very important phrase, no? Text without context is pretext. Chair Kiko actually gave me a Filipino translation of that in the elevator, but I cannot repeat it. And if I may add, timing is of the essence. No? Today, our country faces critical challenges. Massive poverty and deep inequality that divides our people, the continued existence of political dynasties and the blatant disregard for the rule of law and the right to life, our inability to think Filipino as one people, bound by a common destiny, striving to build a just peace throughout the land. These concerns are the priorities we must address urgently. The haste to draft a new constitution by converting Congress into a constituent assembly, ostensibly to make a radical shift into a federal form of government, I am convinced will further distract, if not deviate, from the issues that should remain as our priorities. Nearly 3/4 of our people are unfamiliar with the 1987 Constitution. Many of the provisions in our Constitution have not been fully implemented. And after some 30 years, a good number of them still require enabling laws. If we dedicate ourselves to ensuring that the articles on social justice and human rights, on local government, and on the accountability of public officers, to name but 3, are fully understood, observed, and implemented, then the principal objectives of the proposed charter change can in fact be met without having to draft a new constitution. I believe, that the present Constitution is not the problem. It is indeed part of the solution. Do we need to shift to federalism to address the concentration of political and economic power now in the hands of urban-based decision makers, particularly those in the National Capital Region? I will not answer this question as requested by our chair. I will simply say that the Constitution, in particular Article 10 on local government, specifically Sections 5, 7, and 13, already provides a lot of space, a lot of scope to in fact meet the demands of what federalism wants to achieve. The local government code, and the principal author, in fact, is with us, mentor, and I think nowadays you say Lodi, is it correct? One of my idols in the Parliament of the Streets and in our trips together in different far-flung places, fighting together. I really want to acknowledge the contributions you have made to our country. The local government code, moreover, can be amended and improved to further decentralize power and distribute more wealth more equitably without having to amend the Constitution. Take Section 521. If you read Section 521, on the 5-year mandatory review, it states Congress shall undertake a mandatory review of this code at least once every 5 years, and as often as it may deem necessary, with the primary objective of providing a more responsive and accountable local government structure. I think we have I think we have 7 senators. May I respectfully ask how often and when this mandatory review was last done and with what result? Can this perhaps be the opportune moment, the right time to do so? Just this morning, may I please? I think we have with us, here with the Institute of Federalism. I think we have with us the PDP Laban Institute of Federalism, and I just saw this. I have not read it. The Quest for a Federal Republic. I only have read. Thank you very much. I only have read the executive summary, and in fact, my whole question, I have a one-page critique, with all due respect. In fact, the title of my critique is "Why Put the Cart Before the Horse?" Because in their document, it says the transition must be slow, deliberate, and purposeful. It must ensure the capability and readiness of the regional local governments to write a regional and local government code, to organize the regional commissions, to have a regional organic act. And so my question is this: why not first prepare the ground and then implement? Prepare the people, the policies, and the institution. And for example, it speaks of fiscal reform, the importance of fiscal reform. It speaks of political, electoral, and other reforms. And therefore, my question is, why not deal with the preparation? Why not prepare fully, comprehensively, so that when it is time to move on to a federal system, to change the Constitution at some time or other, then we are fully prepared, not rush. And so, allow me to end by raising the issue of trust in the process and the issue of the transition period to a federal system. I am certain that you are aware of the concerns of our people, and I do not wish to belabor the fact. If we trust the process, we will trust the outcome. What the country needs most at this time is to deepen our democracy, make our economy more just and inclusive, and ensure that the basic rights of all are respected and a just peace prevails in the land. A new constitution is not the answer, much less through a process such as a constituent assembly. Federalism, not at this time. A new constitution, not now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May we request the audience to refrain from clapping. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ed Garcia, for your inputs. Before we proceed with Justice Azcuna, just for the record, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the following. Senators Bam Aquino, Senator Lauren Legarda, Senator Richard Gordon. They've joined us. As resource persons, we have the President of the League of Cities of the Philippines, Mayor Herbert Bautista of Quezon, former President, who is Mayor of Quezon City. We have Attorney Romeo Benitez, Director for Legal Services of the DILG. We now have Justice Azcuna. You have the floor for your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Honors, I'd like to open first by considering the present Constitution. We are going to revise this Constitution. We might as well know what it is. Our Constitution, like any good Constitution, has three essential parts. What I call the Constitution of Liberty, which is the Bill of Rights, the Constitution of Government, which are the provisions that deal with the structure of our government, in our case, presidential, and the Constitution of Sovereignty, a portion that is essential but not very well known, and that is the portion of the Constitution that provides for how the Constitution itself may be changed. In other words, Article 17 here. That is one of the three essential parts. It is very important. In our case, we are now wrestling with the meaning of Article 17. The present Constitution is the longest running Constitution of the Philippines unamended. Not a single comma has been changed. Why? There have been attempts to amend it. They all failed. Why? Because of Article 17. Is Article 17, therefore, a catch-22 situation that prevents the 1987 Constitution from being amended? I don't think so. Article 17, let me explain how it came about. When we were framing the present Constitution, Justice Davide, Chief Justice Davide and I were chairman and vice chairman, respectively, of the Legislative Power Committee. Our committee voted by one vote for a unicameral legislative body. It was, in fact, a tie, and our chairman, Davide, had to break it after drinking a glass of water, and he voted for unicameral. So we submitted a draft to the plenary of an Article 6 that contained only one chamber, called National Assembly. When we presented our draft for voting in the plenary, we lost by one vote. One vote, because Peli Aquino voted for a bicameral, convinced by a very moving speech by Bernie Villegas, who said that there is a need for a body that will look at the forest and another that will look at the trees. And the forest and the trees won by one vote. And so I sat down. I was directed by our president, Cecilia Munoz Palma, to rewrite Article 6 in order to reflect a bicameral Congress. And I did. In 3 hours, I wrote Article 6 and submitted it for approval. It was approved. Why did I not rewrite Article 17? That's not my committee. That was the committee of Sensing Suarez, Commissioner Sensing Suarez. It was up to him to revise it or not. Why did he not revise it? I don't know. Maybe he was a die-hard unicameralist. Now, is it now hopeless? Can we not therefore amend it? Of course not. There's always the Supreme Court. Whenever you frame a law, no matter how brilliant you are, there will come a time, what they call, that the law meets an unprovided case. No matter how clear the provision is, the facts will come when it will have to be interpreted. Why? Because it is an unprovided case, not foreseen by the framers of the Constitution, because we are imperfect. So there is a mechanism for what we call opening the texture of the law. The texture closes in an unprovided case, and there is a mechanism for opening that texture by interpretation, and that is to the courts. We have therefore a provision in the Supreme Court that can interpret with finality the meaning of the Constitution. Now, why has there been no attempt to bring a proposed change or amendment or revision to the Supreme Court? Because there has been no actual case yet where both chambers agreed to propose an amendment or a revision. Why not? Because they could not agree on whether or not they should vote jointly or separately. So what is my opinion on that? Okay, let's look at Article 17. The provision says that any amendment or revision the Constitution may be proposed by the Congress, upon a vote of 3/4 of all its members. How can you reconcile that with a bicameral? Very easy. You look at Article 6. You have to construe, as Chief Justice Puno said, this Constitution holistically, not just by looking at one part. You have to look at all the parts. Article 6 on the Legislative Department says, the legislative power shall be vested in the Congress of the Philippines, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. It shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Those are the members of Congress. So when you say 3/4 of all the members, 3/4 of the House and 3/4 of the Senate, because the members of Congress are the Senate and the House of Representatives. You cannot have a Congress without the Senate. You cannot have. Even a constituent body cannot be House of Representatives only. And so when it speaks of the Congress, you have to refer to Article 6. Ano ba yung Congress na yan? Senado po yan at saka House of Representatives. There is a misnomer that we practice. We call people congressmen. There's no such thing as a congressman in the Constitution. You are either a representative or a senator. Why? Because you are not a member of Congress. You are a member either of the Senate or of the House of Representatives. When you say members of Congress, all its members, you mean members of the Senate and the House. So 3/4 of that. 3/4 of the Senate, 3/4 of the House. Why 3/4? Because they are very important. We are revising or changing the Constitution. It is the highest law of the land. It is very important. So we need 3/4 vote. Why? To impeach only 1/3. Why? Because we made it easy for a public official to be impeached. Why? We want accountability in our public officials. So it is now easier under this Constitution. Before it was hard. Now it's very easy. Only 1/3 you can impeach, not convict. It's harder to convict. You go to the Senate, you need 2/3 to convict. Harder. But to impeach, easier now. But to amend or revise the Constitution, 3/4 yan. Mahalaga ito. Kailangan, approve na ito ng mga tao eh. 16 million people approved this, 77% approved, only 4% against. Only 4 million or 22% against. So, medyo mabigat. At this determines our future, our destiny. All our hopes, our aspirations are distilled here. We went out, Ed Garcia and I, to Bicol. We went to the marketplace. We asked the fishermen, ano bang gusto ninyo? And we sat down with them. And you know the fishermen came out with how to counter martial law, exactly the same way that the UP College of Law proposed. The present provisions containing safeguards against martial law came not only from the UP professors, but also from the fishermen of Albay. So we consult our people. We need 3/4 vote. So what do you do? My proposal, do what is doable. Number one, should you amend or revise the Constitution? Yes, because it's already 30 years. But amend it first, do not revise it. Because revision is such a big work. And you have many things to do. So why not just amend it first? You have here on the table a proposal, Joint Resolution number 1, to amend the Constitution by making the economic provisions flexible. Why don't you do that? Both houses agree on doing that first. And in so doing, you will be able to present to the Supreme Court a formula for amending the Constitution, a concrete case which the court can decide whether or not the provision, the formula you followed, let's say 3/4 voting separately, is the correct formula. The Supreme Court can then determine and interpret Article 17 without our having to wrangle first with federalism for maybe 5 years before we can agree on how a federal state should look like. This one is doable and doable right now. Yes, and it is necessary in order to improve the lives of our people. Ang pinag-usapan dito, ang mga tao natin, ang poverty nila, we need more investments. They cannot come in because of the restrictive provisions. Why did we put these provisions? Because we do not think it will be unamended for 30 years. Can economic provisions freeze the policy of a country for 30 years? It should not. So we make it flexible. All you have to do is put, unless otherwise provided by law. Leave it to Congress. Only the economic provisions to be changeable. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Justice Azcuna. After hearing several of our resource persons giving their opening statements, and considering that there are several others in the panel who were also invited and will be providing us inputs, there is a request that we first allow some of the senators to raise questions, and without prejudice to any member of the panel who may wish to answer or respond may also raise their hands, and the chair will acknowledge the other resource persons. If that is okay, we will go by way of order of appearance. We will now allow, before that, earlier Justice Azcuna mentioned that they went to the people. We would just like to place on record that this hearing is actually being, there is a live streaming of this hearing on the internet, and therefore Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and other social media platforms are being utilized so that these hearings are disseminated as far and as wide as possible. That is for the record. And so we will now proceed. The order of appearance, we will give each senator 7 minutes to raise their questions for the first round. Senator Lacson, you have the floor.
Maraming salamat po, Mr. Chairman. And good morning to all our resource persons. I have a scoreboard here. After listening to at least 5 who made their opening statements, is 3-2. 2 are against revising or amending, and 3, 3 are in favor. Namely, former Senate President Pimentel, of course, Chief Justice Puno, and Justice Azcuna. On the other hand, not now, si Professor Garcia, and matinding no kay former Chief Justice Davide. After listening to the opening statements of at least 3 highly or eminent, learned and experienced former justices of the Supreme Court, I was just wishing that the congressmen who were strongly batting for a joint voting, or voting jointly, were listening kanina para mahinaan na sila ng loob at huwag na ipagpilitan na hindi kami dapat ay voting separately. Having said that, assuming that we need to amend the Constitution, ang question ko is on the mode of amending or revising the Constitution. There are 3 modes, but of course the third one we'll not discuss anymore kasi people's initiative, impracticable kasi wala naman talagang legislation in that regard. So we'll just choose between the 2. And my first question is, between the 2, what are the advantages of one over the other? In terms of, alisin ko na yung cost, Chief Justice Puno, sabi niyo masyadong cheap. So in terms of practicality, in terms of comprehensiveness, and most importantly, what good would it bring to the Filipino people? So I'd like to hear from our resource persons, not limited to those who have spoken earlier, but I'd like to address that question to any of our resource persons. Ano po ba yung mga advantages of one over the other? Meaning, CONAS over CONCON or CONCON over CONAS. Maraming salamat po. I'd like to address that first to my good old friend Sal Panelo.
Sa totoo lang po, kahit na anong paraan, whether CONAS or CONCON, ang taong bayan pa rin ang magdidesisyon. So it doesn't matter really. I remember the President during one cabinet meeting saying that, kasi initially kung matatandaan niyo po si Presidente, gusto niya CONCON. Pero nung sinabi sa kanya, gagastos ka dyan baka hanggang 14 billion. So sabi niya, edi, gastusin ko na yun para sa taong bayan. Anyway, nandiyan naman kayo. Tapos, hindi ko makalimutan yung sinabi niya. Maraming ko kontra. Kasi sabihin, vested interest kayo. Pero, ang pakikiusap ko lang sa inyo, yung gagawin yung saligang batas ay hindi labag sa interest ng taong bayan. Sapagkat pag ginawa niyong labag, tandaan yung sasabihin ko, lalabanan ko yan, I will campaign against the ratification of the Constitution. So para sa akin na, regardless, whether CONCON yan or CONAS, pag yan ay labag sa interest ng taong bayan, from the point of view of many people, hindi rin makakapasa yan.
Before we reach ratification, before we conduct a plebiscite, necessarily, we'll have to go through the first stage, which is via CONAS or via CONCON. And that's precisely my question. Kasi we're here to make our decision. Kasi kung ang di-decide namin dito as a committee and eventually sa plenary, there's no need to amend, then I might as well move to adjourn. There's no point discussing anymore, but we are discussing here yung assumption that there's a need to amend or revise the Constitution. But before we reach that stage, that this is presented to the people for ratification, kailangan magpili muna kami to make our wise decision kung via CONAS or via CONCON. Yun po yung akin tanong.
Ang nakikita ko lang ang advantage ng CONAS, Constituent Assembly. Mabilis. Magtatrabaho kagad kayo. Pero pag CONCON, magbobotohan pa. Magagawa pa kayo ng muna ng batas. Magkaroon ng CONCON, kakaroon pa ng eleksyon, matagal. Samantala kayo, nakaupo na kayo uumpisahan nyo kagad. Sa gastos naman, sabi nga kanina rito hindi importante ang gastos. Ang mahalaga, magkaroon.
My second question is, and I will address it again to any of the resource persons present, for the information and enlightenment of those watching, kasi kami, nagbasa naman kami ng konti. What is the difference between revision and amendment? I think this is a vital question that our people should understand first, before we go into amending or proposing or revising the Constitution. Maybe I should ask the two Chief Justices. Chief Justice. The distinction between amendment and revision is clear-cut. Both the qualitative test and the quantitative test. When you say amendment, you are talking of piecemeal amendments. You talk of revision, you are talking of amendments that go to several provisions of the Constitution. That is, that is why I refer to the quantitative test. You also have the qualitative test. You look at the significance of the amendments, the changes that will be proposed. if the changes are very important, they go to the essence of the policies and the other important parts of the Constitution, then you need a revision.
Is altering the principle of separation of powers, for example, need revision or amendment?
That will need revision, Your Honor, because you will be rebalancing the powers of government, rebalancing the powers of the legislature vis-a-vis the executive, the powers of the executive vis-a-vis the legislature and the judiciary, the powers of the judiciary vis-a-vis the two other branches of government.
Thank you, sir. Before Mr. Chairman, before I recognize Chief Justice Davide, si Professor Lavinia would like to say something about the first question that I posited earlier.
Yes, please proceed, Dean Tony.
Thank you, Chair. I actually speak from my point of view as a constitutional law professor as well as a legal history professor. I filed after my master, Justice Vivi Mendoza taught me my basic constitutional law, that to change the Constitution and to do it right, you must actually follow the right procedure that is acceptable to the people and that makes the people participate as extensively as possible. And in that sense, a constitutional convention is always superior over other forms. But I agree with Chief Justice Puno that you can have a hybrid of fewer elected representatives with a few appointed ones to do it right. We have to remember that every time we tried to change the Constitution and we didn't follow proper procedure, in the case of the 1971 Constitutional Convention, it was actually a good convention. Pimentel, Senator Pimentel is there, but and several others here were there, but it was hijacked at the end by martial law. The Parity Rights Amendment was a Constituent Assembly. That's an example, actually, of a Constituent Assembly decision, but it was also hijacked by denying seats to the Democratic Alliance representatives. And so every time we do that, the next few years we're confused, we're fighting. There's always attempt again to reject that Constitution, and we shouldn't do that for this particular case. My main concern, and I agree with the positions by everyone that it has to be separate voting. I'd actually want to answer your last question, Chair, which is that can Congress, the two houses in a resolution, joint resolution, limit the power of the Constituent Assembly? I think CJ Puno is correct. You cannot really do that. The moment you convene a Constituent Assembly, that's a separate body. And so that body can make decisions, and you might even have an agreement, a written agreement with the Senate, with the House, that it's voted jointly. But if they decide to change that agreement, they can decide to send this to the COMELEC, whatever is approved. I would suspect the COMELEC would have the option, will let the people decide. And I would suspect the Supreme Court will also have that option. Let's say the Supreme Court will say that, but they would have that option, that the argument that is up to the people to decide, it's up to the people. So it's very worrisome for me, for the Senate to even agree. One way of doing this might be the approach of Justice Azcuna, that you might actually try a few amendments and test it. For sure, it will go to the Supreme Court anyway, and so we will have a clear precedent that the Supreme Court says it's joint voting, it's separate voting that's required. That's one way of doing that. We can be more deliberate in following this, but I worry very greatly that if you convene into a Constituent Assembly and the Senate agrees to do that regardless of your agreement with the House on it, that in fact that can be reversed, and whatever is approved by 3/4 of the members of the Constituent Assembly can in fact be sent to the COMELEC for plebiscite.
Thank you. Senator Lacson, you can continue with your...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last Monday, I filed the Senate Resolution 580, calling or directing the Senate to constitute itself into a Constituent Assembly, apart from the House. And I'd like to get your view on this particular issue. will it hold? Assuming that it goes to the Supreme Court. I thought of filing this resolution along with some members of some of my colleagues, Senator Soto, Po, Subiri, and Hunasan, thinking that at least we can have a fallback. No? Kasi kung walang yung tinatawag na mga abogado na justiciable issue na i-address ng Supreme Court, walang magiging ruling. So if we adopt this resolution and proceed with proposing amendments via a Senate Constituent Assembly, then somebody could raise the issue before the Supreme Court. And in case the Supreme Court would rule that it should be in joint session as a Constituent Assembly and further voting jointly, then we will no longer enter into an agreement with the House to meet in joint session. Instead, we'll just pass a resolution or calling for a CONCON. So, kung nandyan po pa kayong tatlo sa Supreme Court, wala kaming problema, may tatlong boto na agad kami. But you know, this is a different Supreme Court. We're not trying to prejudge the sentiment, individual sentiment of the members of the court right now. But we'd like to get your input at least kung mag-go hold water itong kasama sa under consideration in this particular committee hearing. Your view, sirs.
I will start first, no longer as a sitting member of the court. But I would like to commend and congratulate you for filing that resolution, for the Senate now to act on proposing or initiating an amendment to the Constitution as a separate institutional body, independent and coordinate with the lower house. I have two reasons why I should commend you for that. One, the proposal in the lower house may reach its goal by riding on a bullet train. It could be the second train in the lower house, faster as expected, because you have in the lower house a super majority. And I don't think with that composition of the lower house now, there'll be a objective deliberation. In short, we could even say that it is a done deal in the lower house. You, in the Senate, with that resolution, you could put a brake to any attempt to railroad a proposal to amend the Constitution. It is possible that some people might go up to the Supreme Court to question the step that you have taken. But that step is precisely the first step I mentioned when I'm in my opening statement. When it is when the amendment would be done by 3/4 of Congress. So the first is by the CONAS. What did you say about the ass? Anyways, if it was CONAS, there are two ways of doing that. One, for each house to initiate, and then as if it is an ordinary legislative action, as if it is passing a law, separate law. That would require 3/4 if initiated by the Senate. In your case, it would be 3/4. And then once approved, it will have to pass to the lower house. And the lower house should act on it, and if it would have its own version and approved by the lower house, there could be a conference committee, as proposed by Father Barnas in the article in his book that I just cited. So, congratulations again, and I hope that the Senate can truly serve as the conscience of the nation.
Thank you very much, sir. Follow-up question related to that issue. We are now 23 because Senator Cayetano has been appointed. No, the Article 17, Section 1 says 3/4 of all its members. When it says of all its members, does it refer to the membership of any Congress or any Senate, for that matter, or the membership of the present Senate, the 17th, under the 17th Congress?
The present.
So it's 3/4 of 23. Because there's a difference in, there's a big difference.
23 should be the basis.
There's one vote difference, because if it's 3/4 of 23, it's only 17, 18. Whereas if it's 3/4 of 24, no, it's 19 and 18.
Just with the permission of Senator Lacson, and for the record,
Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, the Senate has always interpreted the phrase "all senators" to be 24, regardless of the number. In other words, when we elect the Senate President, majority of all the senators have been interpreted to mean 24 senators, and therefore the majority is 13. That's the interpretation accorded to the phrase "all senators." And former Senate President Pimentel can attest to this. We always interpret it as referring to 24, not to the present number.
So it's always generic, 24.
24, yes, that's how it is.
Mr. Chairman, how can I disagree with an incumbent member of the Senate? I can disagree with former justices. But incidentally, in this regard, I believe really that the number should be 24 because the Constitution may be amended at any given time. And so the basis of the requirement of the number of senators to be considered should be the composition that is defined by law. So that at any given time, you may revise the Constitution, but based on the number of the senators as provided by the Constitution.
Chief Justice Puno, sir, about on Reso 580.
Well, first, may I also address this issue of which number to use, 24 or the present number. I agree with Senator Drilon that the number should be 24. And what is the reason for this? You will note that in the case of a CONAS, the number is 3/4. So the number is bigger. The number required makes it more difficult for the CONAS to amend or revise the Constitution. We will be violating this spirit if we compute the number, not as 24, but as the present number. On the query of Senator Lacson, like Chief Justice Davide, I believe this is a very creative, imaginative solution. But having said that, that would certainly be a challenge also in the Supreme Court if you have a proper case. But I like to suggest that if it is really the position of the Senate, that the proper mode of amending or revising the present Constitution is not through CONAS, the Senate should simply say no to this call for a Constituent Assembly. If the Senate says no, gives justifiable reasons or whatever reasons for the consumption of the public, then that is it. That decision of the Senate cannot be brought to the Supreme Court because that is a political decision that will pose a political question that is beyond the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court.
Thank you, sir. Justice, by the way, without your permission, sir, Justice Azcuna, I used you as one of my references in my resolution. So, your view, sir?
Welcome. Yes, I agree that with Chief Justice Puno that it should be the full membership, 24, because it's the harder. And as I said, we try to make it harder to amend the Constitution.
How about the Resolution 580, constituting the Senate into a Constituent Assembly?
That is all right, provided that the whole process will involve both houses, no? Both Senate and the House, because it is both the Senate and the House that can propose amendments. Supposing you pass this resolution, but the House doesn't do anything, wala rin, because it will be a proposal by the Senate only, not by Congress. It should be Congress, as I said, and that means Senate and House of Representatives.
Well understood. Professor Garcia, please, since you are a former member of the 1987, one of the framers of the 87 Constitution. On Reso 580 that I filed,
On
which is
the-
under consideration in this committee hearing.
Yeah, I actually agree with what former Chief Justice David said earlier, which is there's a done deal. We're facing a done deal. And therefore, I think the creative proposal that you have made at least allows that the bullet train be stopped on its tracks, that people rethink, what we're doing, especially because I feel that what this entire process will kind of launch is a distraction, a deviation from our urgent priorities. And the urgent priorities are very clear, as I think all of us recognize. And time is of the essence, that we have to deal with, with the most urgent, the whole situation of mass poverty and inequality, the peace process, especially in Mindanao, the peace processes with the insurgents in the rest of the country, and the whole political and governance issues and the human rights questions. These are major priorities. And if we dedicate ourselves to many other issues, then I'm afraid that we will lose a lot of very valuable time, sir.
That would be my last question for now, to give the other members of this committee their chance to propound their questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lacson. Senator Legarda wishes to just make a manifestation on the matter of the vote of 3/4.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In reference to the question of Senator Lacson on the number of votes needed, while it may not have direct parity, because I'm referring to the Committee on Foreign Relations, but in previous Congresses and in the Congress now, in the concurrence and the ratification of our treaties, we use 24, regardless of whether a member has resigned. When President Aquino was a senator, he had resigned, we had ratified treaties, I chaired the Committee on Foreign Relations, and it was based on 24.
Okay.
When Senator Alan Cayetano resigned, just the ILO convention that we ratified was based on 24. So, but that's
Mr. Chairman, can we follow the procedure that you have outlined?
Yes,
The senators will speak in accordance with the time that they arrived.
Yes,
simply a manifestation I wanted to share with the committee.
we'll do so. Thank you for the manifestation. Before we proceed, the next interpellator will be Senator Hontiveros, but we would like to place on record and acknowledge the presence of the following: the Majority Leader, Senator Soto, Senator J.V. Ejercito is also here, and Senator Nancy Binay. Okay. With that, we now proceed with Senator Hontiveros for your questions. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a quick request at the start, may it be reiterated and put on record that no less than two former Chief Justices and no less than the founder of PDP Laban, and a former Senate President, said that the best mode to change the Constitution, if at all, is through a constitutional convention. So to my first question, Mr. Chairman, to the former members of the 1986 Constitutional Commission, Professor Ed, of course, CJ Davide, former Justice Azcuna, and former Commissioner Flor Bray, it seems that para sa aming mga bata pa noon, o para sa inyong mga mas bata pa noon, how would you characterize the debates then and the deliberations on the proposed constitutional provisions? And with that as a backdrop, what limitations or what dynamics might be anticipated under a Congress kung hindi mapigil nung resolution led here in the Senate by Senator Ping, yung CONAS? What limitations might be anticipated under a Congress dominated by the allies of the President? So ano po yung comparison na maibibigay ninyo noon at yung posibleng ngayon? Mr. Chairman, tinatanong po ni CJ Davide kung sinong sasagot sa mga dating miyembro ng CONCOM. Salamat po.
Your Honor, while the CONCO of 1986 lasted only for about 6 months, yet our deliberations were so extensive. As a matter of fact, we used to meet even on Sunday. The voting of the final draft was even done on a Sunday. So you could consider how much time had been given by the 49. In the end, it was only 48. And very thorough discussion on all the issues. Reflective of all these discussions should be the 3 or 4 volume record of the Constitutional Commission of 1986. So sometimes it was emotional, as a matter of fact, but purely it was exceptionally deliberative, objective discussion of all the issues, considering the demand of the people now after we have just restored democracy.
Salamat po, CJ Davide. And if you would care to answer the second part of my question, at kaya ko po ina-appreciate yung sinabi nyo that the deliberations of the 1986 CONCOM, which gave birth to the 1987 Constitution, were exceptionally deliberative and participatory. Dahil in recent memory, kaya ako may agam-agam at pagtutol talaga sa CONAS, dahil halimbawa sa nakitang pag-aproba at pag-extend pa, halimbawa, ng martial law sa Mindanao. And I do not foresee na kung ipilit ang CONAS dito sa napaka-importanting issue ng constitutional amendment or even revision, na magkakaroon ng isang kasing deliberative, kasing participatory, as thorough, as deep, and as high-quality deliberations as of the CONCOM before. So if you would care to compare and contrast kung ano po yung ginanap nyo noon at ano yung posibleng mangyayari kung CONAS dominated ng mga kaalyado ni Presidente.
I will try to expand a little bit. The members of the Constitutional Commission of 1986 were chosen not taking into account their political attachments or loyalties. And so they were free, actually, to discuss on all depending matters. Many of them were already quite old. And so you could just consider what they have in mind to leave a legacy, a constitution that can really work for generations yet to come, even if yet unborn. But you know very well that, and to be very specific, in the lower house right now, we know what happened immediately after the election. There was a rush to join the exodus of changing of political loyalties. And when a matter is done like that way, I doubt very much if the supermajority now can act with thorough deliberation on a matter which the party itself had only considered to be a platform, a part of its proposal. They would only cite the fact that the president was elected by 16 million, which therefore was practically an endorsement of one of his campaign advocacies, that is the adoption of the federal system. But that overwhelming number must also be considered in light of the number of votes that then candidate Binay got and the number of votes that then candidate Grace Poe had. If you total both number of votes of Binay and Grace Poe, it would even exceed the number of votes of the President Duterte. Now, the two never endorsed the proposal of the President now about the federal system. So I would suppose that we cannot expect much. Again, I would like to say, and I would like to repeat, that it can easily be railroaded by those in power in the lower house. Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat din po. Sige, yes po, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, may I, Mr. Chairman, may I just make a brief comment on it?
Please, you have the floor. Go ahead, Senator Pimentel.
think all of us should still remember that we are a democracy. And that means every person has the right to speak out his or her mind. We should not allow, let us say, a partisan majority to, curtail that freedom of expression that is guaranteed by the Constitution itself. And in this question, Mr. Chairman, let me just also say that we must always remember that good governance does not depend on the governors alone, but on the governed as well. And this is a very important maxim, because I remember, when Lincoln proclaimed no discrimination between and among the Americans a long time, centuries ago. It was not until the 1960s, my dear friends, that a woman by the name of Rosa Parks, who was an ordinary black worker lady in Alabama. And when she was going to work, she would usually take up a bus. But in Alabama at that time, if you are black, you sit at the back, not in front. And then one day, Rosa Parks, a not so educated woman, actually a working woman, a black woman at that, decided, I am an American, therefore I am entitled to the right and the liberties of all Americans. And so she decided to sit in front of the bus. And you know what happened, Mr. Chairman? She was thrown out of the bus, harassed, manhandled, etc. But a few years later, Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of the United States of America, all because one person stood up for her rights. And that is what I would like to stress here, Madam Senator, that I know I've been there before, like you, in the Senate, and so difficult to be a minority. But regardless of whether you are a minority or not, keep on fighting, because that is what the people expect you to do. Do not allow, let us say, the dominant voice. I'm sorry to have to refer to this. You refer to me as the father of the local government, the father of PDP Laban. I'd like to suggest that you don't use that word father of this and that, because my wife knows we only have 6 children. I mean, I said that we now have, but kidding aside, the thing is that we must never allow any supermajority to trample upon our rights to speak out. And that also goes even for the members of the majority. I think if you feel that there's something wrong with us, with what is being advocated, speak out, because the people expect that of you. Thank you.
Salamat po, Kani. Feel na feel po talaga namin sa minority yung sinabi niyong hindi madali, but yes, we will continue fighting. And na-appreciate ko po yung sinabi niyo kanina na dapat magsalita, lalo na't habang may pagkakataon pa tayong magsalita. And I'd like to, if the chairman's clock will still leave me time in a while, I'd like to return to another of your...
Senator
yes,
Hontiveros,
Mr.
I think Secretary Sitoy of the PLN
Yes,
would like
Mr.
to
Chairman.
respond to your earlier question. Please proceed with the permission of Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And good senators in attendance and fellow resource persons. In the history of constitutional making, there was always presidential interference. Apolinario Mabini was directed by President Emilio Aguinaldo to review the Malolos Constitution. In 1935, originally, the term limit of the president was only for 6 years. But because of President Quezon, it was modified. Because 4 years was too short for a good president, and too short for a good president,
and too long for a bad one. So President Quezon got 2 terms, 4 years each. In 1973, President Marcos, of course, intervened. And in 1987, the CONCOM of 1986 were all appointees of President Aquino. So if we are suspecting presidential interference in our efforts to revise the Constitution, we cannot avoid that. Anyway, he had 16 million votes when he won the election in 2016. I'm referring to President Duterte.
Thank you for that. Please proceed, Senator Hontiveros.
Salamat, Mr. Chair. And of course, palagay ko, it would not be excessive to say na we have not seen presidential intervention such as we are seeing now. Kaya po napaka-importante higit yung tanong na ito sa atin ng charter change. And besides, Good Secretary, are you saying that there would be or there will be presidential interference in the CONAS if it came to a CONAS on this question?
Referring to a proposal to have a hybrid way of selecting delegates, perhaps we can give the President, under some standards, 1/3 of the delegates, and 2/3 will be elected in accordance with the process.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In which case, siguro balikan ko na ngayon yung isa pang provocative at sinabi ni Kanene recently, which I really appreciated. Yung panawagan nyo rin sa publiko mismo for citizens to speak up now while we still can. Opo, and to keep on expressing to keep on exercising freedom of expression, lalo na ngayon na nakikita natin na yung freedom of the press, for example, is under threat with the recent developments, for example, regarding Rappler. Pero kanina rin po, during our hearing, sinabi niyo po, kanine, na yung, wait, it's my previous page, yung no elections, tsaka yung isang extended 10-year transition, even towards a commonly desired federal Philippines sometime down the road. Sabi niyo po, kalokohan po yan. Bakit niyo po sinabing kalokohan ng Noel, kalokohan ng isang 10-year transition, even towards a desired federalism?
Well, yung pang kalokohan na yung salita ay galing sa experience ko as mayor. Mayor ako ng Cagayan de Oro noon. But anyway, kidding aside, the thing is that, I mean, how do you justify, how can anyone justify setting aside the exercise of the fundamental rights of our people through the electoral process that is guaranteed by the Constitution without revising the Constitution first? And let it not be said that, sige, let us, anong pangalan, adopt the federal system, pero no election muna. Oh my goodness, I mean, as I tried to say before you, the end does not justify the means. Hindi po pwede na sabihin mo yun just to achieve a good, supposedly a good purpose. Otherwise, even the good intention will be submerged in a mess of a lot of nonsense that are being advocated these days. And so, my dear friends, what I am trying to say is, while we are still free, speak out. Kailan ka magsalita kung hindi na pwede? Might as well do it now. And minsan hindi ko maiwasan. I'm only 84 now, Mr. Chairman, but I remember during the Marcos years, I was arrested 4 times lang naman, but, all because I tried to speak out. But it was worth it, I might say, because eventually we regained our freedoms. And let us not set aside those freedoms, all because we have an objective to adopt the federal system, karapatang pang-tao, set aside mo lang muna. No, sir. That should never be allowed by our people because that is guaranteed by our Constitution.
Salamat po,
Please
Kami. Yes, as you said po, and I'm sure all of us in this room share that spirit, it's always worth it. So, ipagpapatuloy po nating lahat iyan. Mr. Chair, still to the, moving now to the academicians who are among our resource persons here, perhaps Dean Ron and former Dean Tony. I'm sure you've studied different attempts, previous attempts, to change the charter under various presidencies. And binanggit din yata nung isang resource person natin kanina. How would you characterize this current attempt under the present administration? May pinagkaiba ba? May pinagkapareho ba sa mga naunang efforts ng mga previous administrations?
Well, we still haven't seen it play out. Actually, it depends on what the Senate would do. I mean, so I would say I would not answer that particular question. I would say that we should look at the past and what happened in the past and learn from it. I mean, for me, yes, the president always got involved in some form or another, but as long as the bodies that were making the decision were given, you know, the space to deliberate, to make decisions, the plebiscite was done properly, then constitutional change came about, sometimes controversially, but in the end people accepted it. The two instances that were not accepted historically, the past was the Parity Rights Amendment, which became the reason for the 1970 Constitution, among other things, and the Marcos Constitution, which hijacked the 1971 Constitutional Convention process. Those that are not passed, on the other hand, you know, President Arroyo tried a couple of times. President Ramos, or at least people supporting President Ramos, was seen that the main issue was trust. I mean, did the people trust? Was there consensus in society to actually do this? I mean, so I actually am in favor of constitutional change, also of some form of federalism, some form of regional government. As an environmental and natural resources person, I see that need every day as I go around, that the current levels of governance that we have do not really address many of the things that we have to deal with. But I think it's very important to do it properly in that deliberate way, and that's when it succeeds, when you're very deliberate about it, and it's also seen as fair. So the issue for me of joint and separate voting is an issue also of fairness. It's an issue of a decision that the people made in 1987, that the Constitution will be amended in this particular way, and so I really hope that the Senate will not yield on that issue and maybe approach it through Senator Lacson's proposal that I think can be improved even further to be sure that it's really manipulation proof. I mean, in terms of numbers, I mean, I use manipulation in the sense that the other body has a lot more numbers than you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Tony. Would Dean Ronald, Mr. Chair, care to...
Yes,
address the
and this is
question?
your last question.
Yes, thank you so much,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed, Dean Mendoza. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Hontiveros and colleagues. I have a prepared statement that I would like to share with the group.